Chapter 1. Commander Kevin Hoyt exhaled through his teeth as he forced the ship's drive into FTL one last time. The engine's parameter page flashed red as the diagnostics kept cycling on and off as the onboard computer registered a myriad of faults. Kevin was pushing too hard, and he knew that he was risking everyone on board in this last-ditch effort to escape the consulate. It was risky, but he had no choice but to push forward. The scout ship, designated as CSC-32 Interceptor, shook with enough force to make his teeth rattle in their sockets. The whine of the drive's fans, whirring at thousands of revolutions per minute, was dulled only by the creaking of the hull as it fought to maintain course and speed. The Interceptor bucked madly under his control. Even in the vacuum of space and intensely high velocities, the concept of turbulence existed. The effects of coronal mass ejections created disturbances known as Alphen waves. The way they affected small metal objects varied based on their intensity, but at the moment it felt as if they were trying to shake the small scout ship apart around him. The good news was that if the ship failed, then his new life on the run was over. The bad news was that his family would pay the price as well. "Just a little more," he hissed as the automatic throttles forced themselves back to a safer speed. He braced himself against his seat, foregoing the restraints to leverage himself against the rising tension of the auto-throttles. He couldn't blame the ship for fighting back. Under normal circumstances, the Interceptor was only trying to protect itself from catastrophic failure. Too bad the real catastrophe was behind him and closing in. The ship was dubbed the CPC Destroyer, a personnel carrier with a small crew but enough firepower to protect the extraction team on board. All Kevin had to do was slip up, and the destroyer would dock with his scout ship, and the boarding party would seize his family and take them into custody. "Not on my watch," he muttered as he kept pressing the throttles forward. Sweat ran down his face, his cheeks flushed from exertion as he willed the ship to go faster against his otherwise better judgment, and the flashing alarm from the computer. "Come on!" A new string of emergency tones sounded, shifting his attention away from wrestling the throttles and back to the engine's parameter page. The distraction was enough for him to release tension and allow the auto-throttles to force themselves back, right on the wrong side of FTL. He groaned with defeat and glanced nervously as the readout depicted overheating conditions and degradation of the second and third stages. It was critical, and continuing to fly this way would destroy the drive and cast them into the expanse without power. Death would soon follow. "God help us," he said as he relaxed his grip on the throttles and the ship decelerated rapidly. He grimaced as the waist strap, the only one he kept in place, tightened around his lap and threatened to cut into his body as inertia pulled him towards the forward main console. He held his breath and grit his teeth until the sensation slowly waned. Several seconds later the pressure settled to something less extreme. Kevin sighed and cycled through the menus on the console, trying to find out just how badly damaged the ship was. He knew he overdid it, forcing the drive into FTL without a proper cooling period. It was risky to the point of carelessness, and the fact that he and his family were not dead yet was a blessing. The real question was how long would that last at this pace? He initiated a full diagnostic for the drive, needing to know exactly how bad it was to determine whether their escape was likely. He settled back into his seat, nervously, noting the countdown on the screen as the ship ran the algorithm of a built-in test. 5 minutes was going to feel like forever at this rate, so Kevin distracted himself with the ship's array screen and waited impatiently for his pursuers to appear at any second. His finger danced around the trigger of the railgun expectantly, but the seconds merely ticked on, with nothing more than the sound of his heart beating in his ears and a rumbling in his stomach. "Get out of your own head," Kevin muttered, trying to free himself of negative thoughts as they swarmed around him. They were inescapable ever since he discovered that he was wanted by the consulate for treason. The justification for the charges was beyond him, and the accusation appeared out of nowhere. Kevin had just returned from a scouting mission, excited to experience a 2-day port of call at home to visit his family when he received the news. If not for the fact that he arrived early and standing in his living room when the alert was released, he might have been taken into custody. Instead, he did the only thing he knew to do. He gathered his family and ran. Somewhere in the process and frantic thoughts, he made the unwise decision to steal the scout ship and further perpetuate his guilt. Kevin did not doubt that his actions only served to paint him in the darkest light, but it was too late. He hoped that time would allow him to gather enough evidence to plead his case, though it seemed more unlikely with each passing day, especially as his pursuers continually closed in on him. His eyes fell on the tick marks he made on the console with a grease pencil. Each one represented a point where the destroyer's weapons system was locked on to the interceptor. The voice coming from the destroyer's comms was of an old friend, but that did little to calm his spirit. The mandate was clear. Commander Hoyt was a traitor, and he was to be dispatched accordingly. The word dispatch had a solemn ring to it each time he thought about it. He fought the urge to give up on the ever-worsening situation and turn himself over to the consulate. Captain Dixon had pleaded him to do so with each transmission. It was tempting, but he couldn't help wonder what would happen to his family if he did that. What would they think of him? He had to fight to prove his innocence. Yet the consulate's case against him only grew stronger. At what point would it be too late? That was the lingering question of a desperate man. The console chimed and his eyes moved to the diagnostic screen. Stages 2 and 3 were operating at 35% and were much too damaged to sustain FTL. At this rate, he doubted the drive's ability to lift off from a habitable planet. But if he had any hope of repairing the engine, then he had to land somewhere. "I'm sorry, old pal," he said as he rubbed his hand on the console as he would to comfort a friend. "I shouldn't have pushed you so hard." The situation had gone from bad to worse, and Kevin hesitated to tell his family what he had done. The interceptor was their lifeline. It was all they had after he ripped them from a life they loved and forced them to become fugitives. Kevin had no idea what charges would be filed against them for following him on the run, and all he could do was pray for leniency on their part when the time came. His jaw tightened and his anger boiled as he thought about the life they had and the dismal future he placed on his family. "I should have thought this through better," he thought, as he unstrapped the lap belt and pulled himself out of the seat using the overhead rails. After 14 hours strapped into the seat, his legs were weak. Kevin braced himself against the bulkhead and took several deep breaths before exiting the cabin and entering the common area of the scout ship. His wife and daughters were seated before him, each one fully restrained. He saw the tear streaks from his youngest daughter's eyes, despite the stoic expression of bravery she forced upon herself as he walked into the space. "Is everything all right with the ship?" Sarah asked. The measured tone of his wife's voice betrayed the worry that he knew she felt. He saw it in her eyes, the result of 2 decades of love that created a shorthand in communication that was undeniable. "I compromised the drive," he said shamefully. "We don't have much choice other than to land and repair it." There was hesitation as her lips trembled. She took a deep breath and then asked, "What system are we in?" He canted his head towards the cabin and peered at the nav screen. "On the outer edges of the Empire in the Karnak system. I don't know if the consulate will think to come this far, but nothing is preventing them from landing on Karnak to try and find us. We need to expedite the repairs and take off for another system." "How long will that take, Dad?" Orton asked. He heard the fear in her voice despite the brave face she gave him, or rather displayed at the benefit of her young sister. The last week had done much to force his children to grow up quickly, and he felt guilty destroying the last years of their childhood by pulling them from the only life they had ever known. "Karnak should have a scrapyard for the material I need to fix the drive. The key is determining what needs to be repaired and how long it takes for us to find it." "I can help you fix it," Orton offered. "Me too," Tara said, breaking her silence. He flashed a smile in their direction. He was unable to fight back the pride he felt at the strength displayed by his children. At 17 and 15 years old, they had grown into mature young adults with bright futures ahead of them. Both would have been excellent prospects to enter the consulate navy as he did when he was a young man. Of course, unless he could be acquitted of the crime in which he was accused, those futures would never happen. "I'll take all the help I can get as soon as we land, all right?" Everyone nodded. "I'm going to chart a course for Karnak, but we have to take it easy on the engine to keep it from overheating. It may take a couple of days for us to get there at our current speed. In the meantime, gather what tools we have available and brush up on the manuals for the ship. The more we know going into the repairs, the more efficient we will be." Sarah smiled. It wasn't happiness, but polite reservation. "We can do this," she said after a breath. She defaulted to keeping her worries out of earshot and projected encouragement to her family. It was her way of standing her ground, and he loved her for it. He nodded and winked knowingly at her. Her glare said everything that her lips didn't. Kevin reflected on it as he stepped away and kept his response to himself until he was out of earshot. I certainly hope so.